This is J.M. DeMatteis, writer of Scooby Apocalypse, and you are listening to a podcast named Scooby-Doo.
Yeah.
Hey gang, and welcome to another episode of a podcast named Scooby-Doo, the show that attempts to unravel 50 years of mysteries, meddling kids, and masked villains. My name is Mike Josick, and I'll be your guide through all things ghostly and groovy as I investigate every angle of every mystery and beyond. So grab yourself some Scooby snacks, fire up the mystery machine, and let's start the show.
Come on, gang. Let's check it out.
And here we are at episode 49 of the podcast. I'd like to thank you all for joining me for yet another conversation with an individual, or in the case of today's episode, individuals who have contributed to the Scooby-Doo franchise in one way or another, creatively or otherwise, past and or present. I am very happy to be presenting my guests on the show today, Ivan Cohen and Sholly Fisch. Their footprint on the Scooby-Doo comic book landscape is substantial. Both have contributed to the Scooby-Doo Where Are You book. Sholly himself has written 50 issues of Scooby-Doo Team Up, and together as a pair, they're responsible for the 12 issues of the Batman and Scooby-Doo Mysteries, which completed its run not too long ago, and they're here to also talk about the Volume 2, which will be coming out in November, which is just a few short months away from when this episode is dropping. If you've read any Scooby-Doo comic books, all ages comic books in general, you've probably run across the work of these two gentlemen. And I have to say that I was quite pleased to be having some comic book guests coming on. As a huge comic book fan myself, I don't feel I get to have as many comic book chats as I would like on the show. And so every time a comic book creator is willing to come on and chat, that is always fantastic for me. And Ivan and Sholly were two genuinely wonderful human beings to chat with. A lot of information, a lot of great stories, and just the overall dynamic of having that extra voice there too, an extra body, like it creates a little more energy, brings a little more diversity to the chat. So I've heard both of them together on other podcasts talking about Batman, Scooby-Doo mysteries and the like, and just a really nice dynamic. Obviously good friends, good colleagues. I just really enjoy what that brings to the overall tone of the conversation. Don't really have much more to add to that, so I'm going to invite you to settle in, buckle up, and enjoy my chat with Scooby-Doo comic book writers Ivan Cohen and Sholly Fisch. See you on the other side. We have a bit of a crowded mic today on the show, so I'll keep the introductions short. One of my guests is a writer known for crafting stories within the DC universe, contributing to various and sundry comic books, both as writer and editor, television shows, and direct-to-video projects. My other guest is another stalwart of the DC universe, lending his talents to many all-ages books, one-shots, tie-ins, and crossovers, as well as writing a series of backup stories in Grant Morrison's Action Comics run. He's also the writer of one of my holy grail collectibles, which would be the Ghostbusters the Return novel, which came out back in 2004, when it was something I foolishly passed on grabbing when I saw it on the bookstore shelf, thinking I would grab it again the next time I was in, and never saw it again. And I believe it now goes on the secondhand market for many, many dollars, but that's my issue. So moving on. Finally, both gentlemen have a long history doing a little meddling of their own in the franchise that is Scooby-Doo, with their most recent efforts within the IP being the Batman Scooby-Doo Mysteries, which just completed its first 12-issue run with collections out now, and another one around the corner just announced. Please join me in welcoming to the program Ivan Cohen and Sholly Fisch. How are you guys doing?
Great, thank you.
How are you?
I'm all right.
Are you feeling a little deja vu about?
I am feeling a little deja vu, yeah. It's hard not to, it's just hard to fake the how you're doing answer.
Well, at least it hasn't changed. At least it hasn't changed since you asked earlier. Hi.
Let's kick things off with a little bit of background as far as your first experiences with the franchise, with Scooby-Doo. Were you both Saturday morning watchers, or was this something that you came to later in life as professionals, or something stranger and more profound?
I was pretty traditionally a Saturday morning watcher. It kind of showed up on my TV screens at exactly the right time. I was, 7, 8 years old, and there was Scooby-Doo, and there was Super Friends, and I was, as soon as I could sneak downstairs and not wake everybody up in the house to watch TV way too early on Saturday mornings, I was there. The die was cast.
Which show was your gateway? What did you start with?
You mean which Scooby-Doo iteration? Is that what we're talking
Yeah,
about? Or
yeah.
I'm guessing this would have been like 74, 75, 76 would have been the years. So
So probably like
you,
Scooby Scrappy.
I feel like I was
Maybe new
old and
Scooby-Doo movies. Yeah.
I feel like I was aware enough to resent Scrappy showing up. So like I knew that there was a time before Scrappy and there was a time with Scrappy. So whatever year in the chronology that is. Like I don't think I was like I wasn't watching. I was born in '68. I was not watching it at like 1 year old. Like that was not a thing that I have any claim to.
It's hard to tell sometimes because like the show's been in just constant reruns since day one. So like for me, I think I came in with the new Scooby-Doo movies, but like the Scooby-Doo Where Are You was also kind of running simultaneously,
Right.
interspersed in syndication and reruns and whatever. And so for me, those things just all blended together. I honestly couldn't tell the difference. Also, I think we should probably identify voices with names.
I'm Ivan. Hello, I'm Ivan.
We'll throw that in there.
The man of 1,000 voices.
Hello. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Sholly. Is that what you want?
Oh, wow, that's the worst impression of me I've ever heard.
That was just
actually.
one of my many characters.
So,
Sholly, how about
I'm
you?
Sholly. I'm Sholly, and so my answer is the polar opposite of Ivan's, because I'm a Sabbath observer. So as a kid, I could never watch Saturday morning TV, which was an enormous burden at the time, and just killed me to see these ads for all of these shows that I just couldn't watch until maybe 2, 3 years later. Some of them, not all of them, would eventually show up on Sundays or some other time. So I never got to watch Scooby for a period of several years, and had to try to compensate for that. And so I would Scooby comic books and Scooby Viewmaster slides and things like that. And then it wasn't until several years later that I actually got to see the show for the first time. And the rest is history.
When you finally saw it, did it live up to your expectations? I mean, did you have voices in your head that you thought they would sound like and they didn't, or?
I don't think I thought it through to the point of the voices, but no, but it was pretty much what I was expecting, as opposed to Super Friends, which for whatever reason didn't come to a non-Saturday time until I was well into my teens. And so that was a different experience. But I was still young enough when I finally got to see Scooby that no, it was pretty much what I was expecting. But I had watched those Viewmaster slides an awful lot of times by then.
I kind of feel like if you were a comic book fan, even coming into the Super Friends as teens, it was probably not a bad time to come in.
Yeah, yeah. Although I have to say, when I did finally get to see the Super Friends show, the Super Friends comic book in the '70s, I actually not only liked more than the show, but I liked it more than Justice League at the time. And considering that Justice League was my first comic book that I ever bought, that was saying something, because it wasn't a great period for Justice League, but it was a really good period for the Super Friends comic.
That comic was pretty great. I'm with you,
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
There was a good chunk of time where the Batman Adventures comic book was probably the best Batman comic being published.
It was by far the best.
Yeah.
The best Batman comic DC was publishing. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
There's something about just being able to kind of be out of continuity and do your own thing.
I've been doing. I will not subvert the podcast to say this, but I'm wrapping up a DC Universe centered miniseries that takes place on one of the multiversity of Earths, on Earth 11, where all the genders are switched of the major heroes. And I'm co-writing this book, and one of the great joys of it is how remarkably continuity free it is. Like we can just we can add stuff and nobody tells us we're wrong. Like we can just, we don't have to check with anybody else to use a character. We can establish backstory in a panel that nobody's ever talked about before. If mainstream superhero comics could be like that all the time, it would be great. Obviously it can't, because this is a 6-issue miniseries, and if we ever get to do a 7th one, we're going to be stuck with the stuff we did in the first 6. So we've made our own we've made our own trap a little bit.
You can feel free to actually name the book.
Oh, sure. That's Multiversity Teen Justice, which number 6 will come out this fall. I think it's a blur of what's coming out next. Number 5 will be the next one. I think it comes out in a couple of weeks. It's great.
Speaking of which, getting into the comic book industry, developing an interest in comic books, finding an interest in writing comic books. How did that narrative kind of unfold for each of you? Ivan, let's start with you.
Sure. The very condensed version, because it's a Scooby-Doo podcast, not The Adventures of Ivan Cohen and his weird, almost career path.
Coming soon from Image Comics.
Oh man, that's going to be a graphic novel memoir. Exactly. Wow. No one will.
So does that make me the sidekick then?
No, I think of you more as do you want to be sidekick, mentor, or?
Oh no, you know what? It could be a team up where we have to fight first. You have to fight.
That's fine. One of those great misunderstandings. Around the same time I started watching Saturday morning cartoons, my mom made what may have been one of her worst parenting mistakes, and she gave me some rainy day comics to read on a rainy day, and I was hooked. And they were months old, so one of my first comics, I've told Sholly this before, was like part 1 of a 3-part Flash story that involved multiple Earths, and I didn't get the concluding chapters for maybe 20 years. And yet somehow, Vandal Savage had not successfully killed the Earth 2 Flash's wife when he had kidnapped her for reasons, but I didn't know that for quite some time. And then I had publishing years later. I never thought about having a job in comics, even though both major publishers were in the city where I was born and raised, because I was just not that clever. And then I eventually ended up working at DC Comics in marketing, stayed there for a little more than a decade in a bunch of roles, including editing superhero comics, sort of being managing editor of the whole superhero line, and working on TV, movie, and direct-to-video projects and animated series as sort of the friendly person who gave notes saying, no, Superman can't kill people with heat vision. I mean, he can, but he chooses not to. Part of the hero, part of the name, and in superhero. And then when the company moved to the West Coast, I became a freelance writer, pretty much full-time, working a lot for DC. I did non-comics freelancing for many years before that, but once I had the chance to freelance write for comics, DC was sort of my mother tongue. So that's been where I've done most of my stuff. And that's been for about the last 10 years.
And Sholly?
So for me, because I'm so much older than I was the perfect age for the Adam West Batman TV show. I was 5 years old, and it took over my life. I have a vivid memory of crying at a friend's house because his parents wouldn't let us watch the show while we were eating dinner. And that led me to comics. And as I said, Justice League. I still have the copy of Justice League number 62. That was my first comic. And that led to other stuff and so on and so forth. As a teenager, my parents said to me early on, why are you just reading these? Why don't you make your own? And I thought, oh, and started making my own comics. And so as a teenager, I started submitting stories and getting them rejected and collecting my rejection slips and all of that. And then in between college and grad school, I finished college a semester early. And so I had 6 months when I had to do something. So I got myself a job with a minuscule publishing company that was coming out with its 3rd book, I think, at the time. And a couple months later, a friend of mine got a real job with the Wall Street Journal and was leaving his menial file clerk job at Marvel. And I said, oh, wait, tell them you know somebody. And so I did this menial file clerk job for a few months. And through that, met a guy named Sandy Hausler, who also later became my roommate for several years. So it's been a very profitable friendship. But he was the assistant editor on Marvel's in-house promotional magazine, Marvel Age. So he brought me to the editor, Jim Salicrup, to see that I could put a couple sentences together, and I started writing for Marvel Age and did like a couple hundred articles for Marvel Age over the years. But through that, got to know the editors. Through that, got to know when they were looking for stories. Through that, started writing stories, and just it's just kept going until somebody finally kicks me out the door.
Oh, I should say, it occurs to me, my first comics writing experience actually relates to animation, so it can sort of lead us a little bit back to what we're doing here. When I left being on staff at DC, I was very humble and mindful of the idea that I shouldn't jump in front of the line and jump in front of people like Sholly, who'd been actually writing comics professionally for years. That was unseemly. It was my lack of ambition has
Thank you for
historically
that,
been a
Ivan.
problem. I don't know that I thought of you specifically, but you're an exemplar. So there was a comic DC was going to do based on the Green Lantern animated series, which I had been a part of developing in my job in media development at DC before I left the staff. And they were doing a comic, and they already had people assigned to it. People were very talented. And I approached the editor, who I've known for years, and said, if you ever need a fill-in, basically I was really just sort of, as humble and, bowing and scraping as I went. I was like, unlike anybody else, except for the people you have writing the comic and the people working on the show who have jobs, I'm the only person who knows what the show looks like because it's not going to air for another 6 months. You don't have to tell me anything about the rules of the show, who the characters are, like what the character interpretations are. I know all of it already. So with the 4th issue, they needed a fill-in, and by like the 8th issue, I was the regular writer on the book, and it was really, it was all due to like it being a comic based on something that was sort of under some curtain of secrecy. Like I could never have gotten to the Superman editor and been like, hey, let me write a fill-in, because nobody else wants to write fill-in comics of Superman. Only I know how Superman works was not really a conversation I could have.
Now, you guys are known very much for writing all ages books, either books that are connected to animated series or like Looney Tunes and the Scooby-Doo. How do you navigate that way? Is that something that it's just kind of the path of the work, or was it something you kind of steered towards, or what was the path or attraction to that?
Yeah. I mean, over the years, I have written everything from Looney Tunes to Clive Barker's Hellraiser, because I have no pride or shame or hesitation.
I believe that's called versatility, Sholly.
Yeah,
sure.
But a large part of it for me, part of it is just I'm an animation nut, and I love that stuff. Part of it is my day job. The easiest way to explain my day job is to say that for many years I worked at, what was at various times called either the Children's Television Workshop or Sesame Workshop, where they make Sesame Street. And I was in charge of kind of the educational side of things. And now I do the same kind of stuff, but I do it for lots of different production companies around the world. So I've got a PhD in developmental psychology, which is how I do that. And so, so kids and kids media is very much like, Ivan was saying with Green Lantern. It's something that I already know. People don't have to explain it to me and whatever. And, it's like anything. Once you start doing the stuff, then one thing leads to another. And before you know it, you have become the all ages comics guy. So
do you think with your interest in kids media that you producing kids media that you think is of a certain quality is a driving force for you?
Oh yeah. No, I mean, that's what's kept me in my day job for as many decades as it has. It's that, I've seen time and time again that this stuff, because I do, educational TV, makes a real difference for kids. And that's incredibly rewarding, in addition to just being fun, in a way that if I was just doing commercial stuff, it would be fun, but it wouldn't have that side to it. So, when I'm doing the comics, I'm not trying to make everything educational, because, I'll still have Bugs Bunny blow up Yosemite Sam and whatever, and that's fine. But there's an understanding of what's at an appropriate level for kids. And there are times when I will intentionally stick stuff in. I did an issue of Scooby-Doo based on A Midsummer Night's Dream that started with, a soliloquy on page 1. I mean, I'll do stuff like that. And, and part of it is just for my own amusement. And part of it is because this way, 5 or 10 years later, kids will encounter some stuff and go, oh yeah, I remember that. Which is, what I did from any number of comics that I read when I was a kid.
So how did you steer from you're doing Marvel Age and now you're doing the day job as well? Like,
because I just did them all at the same time. So
they were running like
I was doing
Currently.
Marvel Age. Yeah, I was doing Marvel Age while I was in grad school, and
Okay.
I continued doing it for the first several years that I was at the workshop. I was freelance and I was part time, and I could continue doing both at the same time, and it wasn't a problem. And do my classes also because I don't believe in sleep.
Sleep is an
Um,
affectation. It's
well,
really
yeah, yeah,
it's
exactly.
showboating. Oh, I'm going to take time and not do anything but, regenerate cells and, dream.
Exactly,
Ridiculous. What is that
exactly.
about?
But no, but once I was actually working there full time and I couldn't go to Marvel anymore. That's how I fell out of comics for a few years because there was enough turnover that I didn't know any of the editors anymore. And then it became a whole job of then trying to get into DC a few years later when DC started doing kid comics. And I said, well, I work in kids TV. I've written comics for 10 years. So, it seems like it's a good fit. And then, of course, it took me another 2 years before anybody would let me do it. But eventually Joan Hilty took pity on me, and I achieved my lifelong aspiration of writing I Am Weasel. Uh, uh, but that led to other Cartoon Network stuff, and that led to Scooby into Looney Tunes, and that's led to all sorts of other things. So, one foot in front of the other, basically.
And for you, Ivan, it was you got the Green
Trip
Lantern, and then it just kind of
the
like
trip was
dominoes.
yeah. I think the one difference is between Sholly and me in this way is I have no interest in children's well-being, so writing kids comics is really it's what they let me do. No, I think for me, coming from a background where the formative years of my life, the superhero comics I read, all comics were all ages, essentially. If you weren't reading R. Crumb, if you weren't reading indie
True.
books, and I wasn't, the audience it was pitched lower than a high school student typically, but it was a little bit of a reach if you were 7 years old and reading about vibrational frequencies and geosynchronous orbits and
Right.
the things that make Justice League comics from that era uniquely weird. As this issue, Green Arrow, Hawkman's a sexist. That's it. Flash is also a sexist, but differently. That'll keep the readers coming in. And you're 8 and you don't know what's going on. You just want to see the guy with the punching bag arrow shoot someone with it. And for some reason, he's not the main character in the Justice League, whatever. So for me, writing kids comics with an understanding of what's appropriate and what you can get away with, and knowing that if you're doing a Batman kids comic, the bad guys don't have guns and neither do the police, but everyone shoots stun energy things when appropriate. It was still, when I would write kids comics, unless they were Looney Tunes where it was very gag driven, or Scooby with its particular rules, I would just think of it as I'm telling stories, what would make kind of a cool story, and then make sure that the concepts aren't so out there that it would be too much of a reach for anyone. But I like doing grown-up comics too. I don't have quite the breadth of experience that Sholly does, but I've written Evil Dead comics and with, distressing amounts of horror in them. And I've written a lot of quasi-mainstream DC things, because one area I have that I don't think Sholly has, or at least not in as much quantity, is I've done a ton of custom work for DC, where I've written the Snickers ads that appeared in DC Comics, which
Oh,
I
you wrote those.
I didn't write
I
all of them.
wondered who did.
Stuart
Okay.
Moore wrote 1 year of them, and I wrote the other 3. I've written comics for Lunchables and ice cream packages and
Oh, I
the
can beat
backs
you
of
on that one.
cars. Wait, I'm not done. I'm not
No,
done.
no.
But I've done
I
stuff for
wrote
AT&T. I
I
did
wrote
stuff for
gag.
HBO Max back when that was a thing. And I've done stuff in cereal boxes. I did a comic in cereal boxes that I didn't know was going to be printed at a smaller size until after the script was in, and I felt so bad for the artist and so bad for the readers, because 6-panel pages when the comic fits in the palm of your hand is a terrible thing to do to people, and I didn't know. No one told me. But sorry, Shaw, you were saying you can beat me.
No, I was just gonna say I can top your ice cream wrapper because DC asked me at one point to write gag cartoons for some ice cream company in Italy, not to be printed on the wrappers, but to be printed on the ice cream sandwiches.
Oh, I'm envious, deeply envious. What a challenge.
Yeah. Yeah.
First, I want to say the comment about HBO Max in past tense. That one actually.
I I have many feelings about that from a bunch of
Considering,
points of view. I regret nothing, but
oh no, just considering the last couple of weeks, like I just did not expect that to like physically hit when you said it.
I
Actually, the Scooby community is kind of up in arms right now because that whole
sure
holiday
this.
haunt was one of the shows that got canceled.
Mhm.
Um,
And the Scoob, and yeah, that
Yeah.
special, that
Yeah.
sounded like it was pretty good.
yeah,
Paul
and
Dini was
people are
pretty
wondering
bummed.
what's going to happen with Velma now too. So who knows? But I also wanted to comment. You mentioned a little bit earlier, Ivan, about all ages books and how everything used to be all ages. And that's kind of a common misconception with all ages. Like people interpret all ages as just meaning for kids, but forgetting that all ages is all ages. So everyone can enjoy it. And that's what that Batman Adventures book was like.
Mm.
You know, you could be 60, you could be 6, and you could still get enjoyment out of it as long as it's done well and it's a quality, product, for lack of a better word. And I think often some companies get it and some companies don't necessarily attribute the right kind of resources and attention to all ages. It's kind of like a cursory sort of thing that they do. And there seems to be cycles too that sort of goes through, but
I think some of it with comics, I think there's a challenge that I think there's less of, and Sholly can speak to this with some of the some of the longer form stuff he's done lately. When you have sort of the YA formatted graphic novel kind of things that DC has started doing a lot more of, and that other publishers like Scholastic had been doing for years, it's a little easier, I think, to pitch for the publishers to put those books in front of the audience that will best appreciate them. Periodical comics, on the other hand, part of the challenge is that if you're going through the direct market and comic book retail stores, every comic book professional has stories of being in a store where the kids' books are next to the porn because they're on the lowest possible shelf. Because the porn meant to not be in front of everybody's eyes, the kids' books meant to be low enough where a kid in the store could reach them, and the combination is ridiculous. But I think in the direct market universe of things where everything is for teenagers, unless it specifically says mature readers or all ages, what you end up with is all ages books that are perceived as being for little kids. And the publishers are then in the tricky position of having to make sure that nothing in those books, if a parent with a good social media presence picks it up, are going to be outraged by what little Timmy is getting to read, because kids' comics do not make so much money for comic book publishers that they really want a minute of almost any publicity, but certainly not bad publicity. At least that's my take on it.
Yeah. Well, I think that's true. But, I think, again, steering this back around to Scooby a little bit. So one of the tricks of writing all ages comics, which not everybody can do well, and Ivan does it, I do it, is writing the stuff on two levels. And it's something that I learned from watching the Adam West Batman show and from working on Sesame Street and stuff like that, where you can appreciate it as a kid on the basic level of there's all this action, there's all this adventure, there's all this funny stuff and slapstick and all of that going on. But then if you're an older reader, there are the in jokes and there are the references and there are the stuff for them. So when I'm writing Scooby, a lot of the time, like the Midsummer Night's Dream thing, I did a Scooby story that was parodies of Alfred Hitchcock movies. I did, I'll do stuff like that so that the kids have, there's Shaggy and Scooby getting scared and running away, and there's pulling off the mask, and there's all the basic stuff that you expect from a Scooby story that kids will enjoy. And at the same time, there's the other stuff that the older readers can get that extra level on and enjoy for themselves. And the real trick to it is finding a way to do it where the kids don't feel like they're missing out on something, and it just goes right past them. And again, going back to the Batman analogy, I watched the Adam West Batman show as a kid. I had no idea until 10 years later how funny that show was. Because it was Batman and Robin fighting bad guys and doing all of that, and
And
it
every
wasn't until,
episode they were going to get killed. That was
yeah,
serious
exactly.
stuff.
Exactly.
Only later do you realize that a giant rotisserie roasting them to death is ludicrous in
Yeah,
many different directions.
exactly. So, so that's really, I think, what makes the difference between all ages books and books that are specifically kids books. That's really where the all and the all ages comes from.
That makes a lot of sense. I would say too, one of the extra challenges, which I think modesty forbids me from saying that I'm handling it well, but Sholly's been doing great on the Batman Scooby-Doo mysteries, and before that, Sholly on Scooby-Doo Team Up, which is a pioneering accomplishment in the Scooby-verse, if not all kids comics. Oh, come on, with Batman, the challenge of figuring out a story that is sort of meets all those requirements like Sholly was talking about in terms of giving everybody in the audience the sense of having a complete story and it not just being for kids, but also being a story that delivers on the Scooby-Doo of it all and the Batman of it all, even though it's obviously not the Batman who's in current mainstream DC comics, because there's relatively little flaying of skin or deep brooding violence. But I find it exciting and incredibly challenging. I had really hoped to be done with my first issue of the new series, which my issue will come out in November, which is Batman Scooby-Doo Mysteries Volume 2, Number 2. And it's been rough, in part because of the challenge of trying to make it be something for everyone. And this one I keep putting guest characters in, which somebody should stop me because there's too many.
Oh, I'm not going to stop that. But
I know.
But you're going to have to do what I do and just apologize to Dario for making him draw all of
them. Our artist does do a fine job.
I mean, I'm constantly apologizing to artists. So Scott Geralds, who I don't know if you know Scott, but Scott, in addition to drawing Scooby-Doo comics, he worked for Hanna-Barbera for years and years and years. He was one of the guys who designed the pup named Scooby-Doo characters. And the last issue of Scooby Team Up, I did this story. and it's one of my favorite stories, but I still apologize to Scott for it, because it was the crisis of infinite Scoobies. And after having several alternate world versions of Batman show up, I had a team up of every version of Scooby and the gang from every show and the movies and the Scooby Apocalypse comic book and the everything. And Scott had to draw them all and make them all look different. And he did it brilliantly, but I still apologize to him for that.
That is a favorite issue of a lot of people
it's good stuff,
who follow the books, just because acknowledging sort of the whole breadth and width of Scooby history always makes fans happy. They like seeing the different versions because everybody has their favorite, whatever it happens to be, whatever show they experienced when they first came in. So, and also like including like the Sarah Michelle Gellar Daphne and the Be Cool Scooby-Doo characters, that version, and the Scooby Apocalypse, like you said.
I prefer to refer to the Scooby Apocalypse one as the Big Gun Shooty Daphne.
In the Batman Scooby script I'm doing right now, there's a lot of good Daphne stuff in it because it's been solicited, so I'm happy to say in this issue, due to circumstances that could only be described as unlikely, Daphne has to take Batgirl's place for a time, with Velma in the clock tower giving her instructions via earpiece on how to be, as basically Oracle. But
that's wonderful.
We'll see if it delivers. I like the idea. But part of it is, and the villain is Poison Ivy, so really I don't know how I missed the chance to have Poison Ivy also be in a Batgirl costume, since all cartoony redheads can be made to look the same in a kid's comic. But looking up, double checking my Daphne reference and being like, well, remember, she is always danger prone and clumsy, and she is also a black belt in karate who rides motorcycles and is an accomplished singer and guitarist. I'm like, oh yeah, so pretty much I can do whatever I want here. You often hear about the clumsy ballerinas who are, karate masters.
So one of the things about doing Scooby in the 21st century, I think it was when I was doing Scooby Team Up that I decided this. I don't think it occurred to me yet when I first started doing the regular Scooby. But I got to feeling like Daphne had to do more than get in trouble. And so I co-opted the whole danger prone Daphne thing, and I turned it around to she's danger prone Daphne because she is the one who will throw herself in harm's way to help to protect
Mhm.
other people. And that actually works pretty well for an awful lot of that stuff because that allows you to do the karate stuff and the motorcycles. And I think in one issue I said, oh yeah, she had taken bullfighting lessons at one point. But you can do all of that and you can still have her get in trouble because she's being foolhardy, and that's fine.
Right. She's not accident prone. She's not.
Right,
She's not a dope. My challenge
right.
has always been with Scooby from the very beginning is to make it not be the adventures of Velma, who's super smart, and her friends and that dog who slow her down and keep her from solving crimes much faster. like,
Yeah,
like there always has to be a reason that Shaggy and Scooby's insatiable appetite and cowardice combine to
yeah.
reveal some detail that would otherwise have gone missing. It's even harder with Batman in it because, and I think we got to the I got to the place in one of the later issues in the first run where pretty much Daphne and Velma are sort of like, well, Batman must know this already,
Yeah.
right? They're sort of like, yeah, Batman pretty much knows whatever he needs to know. Like they've sort of caught on to that idea.
And
But
Sholly, you kind of in issue 6, I believe it was, with the pup named Scooby-Doo characters, you have
Yeah,
the whole thing with Jenkins and her telling Jenkins to go in danger himself, and then she
yeah.
decides that she's going to do it instead of sending her butler to do it. So you kind of address it
Oh,
there.
very good. I wasn't even going to bring that up, but yes, yes. You want because once I had this by that point I'd been doing that sort of thing for a few years, so I decided this was the place to play with it. So yeah, yeah.
I suspect that both Sholly and I, on some level, feel like those first 12 issues, we could have, either one of us probably could have done all 12 of them. But at the same time, the taking turns, I think, I don't, I know it upped my game a little bit. Also, it sort of made the
Yeah,
challenge of
absolutely.
finding different
Yeah.
stuff to do. Like, I love that we ended up in the first issue, which I'm very proud of, with the time travel and all that, that provided grist for Sholly to use the question of how many first meetings have Batman and the Scooby-Doo characters
Right,
had. It's like,
right.
no, we first met as children. No, we met in Gotham City during Batman Year One. Everyone knows that.
Yeah. I mean,
That's
I felt like I hit my stride on Batman Scooby Mysteries. Right. I think it was probably that pup issue, right around issue 5 or 6. But absolutely, the two of us writing it, in parallel definitely made me up my game because I cannot believe to this day I can't believe I wrote 50 issues of Scooby-Doo team up and I never thought to team up Shaggy with the Shaggy Man. And Ivan got there before I did. But
I was
but
double checking. I was like, he couldn't have missed it. He couldn't have. Come on. So many books.
I have no idea how I missed that one. I honestly don't. But but it was like that, each of us because we would send each other the scripts as we were doing it because we wanted to make sure we weren't stepping on each other's toes and we weren't repeating stuff from one to the other. And it really was, it was a great prompt to say, okay, that was pretty good. Now let me see what I can do.
I
I've
just
got
got
a
mad because you kept being ahead of me on schedule.
I've got about a half a dozen questions based
Yeah.
on just everything that was just kind of discussed, but I'm gonna start with you guys talking about kind of upping your game and catching your stride around sort of issue 6. That was very much something I wanted to talk to you about because that was the vibe I got from the book where once you hit that pup issue, both of your issues seem to be kind of operating on a different level. And I don't know if some of that was just because you had some issues behind you, maybe you're working out some kinks or format or whatever, but it seemed, I don't know, there's more of a rhythm and a flow to this stuff, and the way that you were handling the characters felt a little more playful. And I'm kind of curious if I'm reading into this or if that was something you guys felt.
There were two things for me that neither of them have to do with I guess the technical term would be talent or craft. Is I believe while I was writing the early half of the book, I was also doing the Space Jam movie adaptation for the sequel, which was done as a 100+ page graphic novel for reasons that elude me, but do not elude my bank book, which is very nice. So I was probably trying to juggle a lot more, and once that was clear, I could focus on what made it work. Although my favorite issue of my issues is still number one, I think.
Okay.
The other thing, but I take the word of a reader over the word of me. So there's that. The other thing is, and I don't know if Sholly remembers this even, aside from that we changed editors in the back half of the book, which I don't think is the reason that the quality of the issues might have changed. The other thing was that when the book was originally developed, at one point there was a discussion of having not all the Mystery Inc. characters in every issue. That there were, so I remember having story pitches where like there would always be Scooby and Shaggy would basically be in every issue, but maybe not all the other characters would be in there. And I think that faded over time. And so some of the formula may have changed, at least from my perspective, of no longer having to worry about how do I do a story with some of the Mystery Inc. gang. I think it was probably intended as so you don't have to have 8 characters in every story, plus introducing a bad guy and a suspect and a friend of the gang who brings them into the place that they are, where there's the crimes. But
there are a few moments where people mention, boy, you and Batman seem to be teaming up a lot lately.
Sure. So, yeah. So for me, I came at it from a different place because I had just come off of 50 issues of Scooby Team Up. So for me, and a bunch of those issues had Batman in them. And so for me, I came in trying to figure out what can I do that's different than what I've already done, coupled with trying to coordinate, since I wasn't the sole writer on it, I needed to be conscious of what Ivan was doing and make sure that we were in sync and whatever. And so I was sort of juggling a lot of that stuff at the beginning. And I was intentionally doing my first couple stories, pretty straightforward stuff. Just, Batman, Scooby-Doo, team up. I put the Joker in one of them, stuff like that. And then as we settled in a little bit, then I felt like I could play with it a little more. But the pup named Scooby-Doo issue is actually Ivan's fault. I had pitched doing a Batman Year One story when I did my initial pitches, and our editor Michael said, "Oh, sorry, Ivan already pitched a Batman Year One story, which was his first issue." So I said, "Well, okay, well, if I can't do Batman Year One, then I'm going to go before Batman Year One," and and did the pup named Scooby-Doo issue. So it was, for me at least, I was getting more playful with it as I went along because we had settled into a groove, and because I kind of understood what the rules were by that point and how to bend them, and how, all of that sort of thing.
And I don't mean that when I say that the back half feels more playful and more fun, I don't mean that in a demeaning way, like the first half is garbage.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't take offense.
It just okay, great.
No worries.
Well, I was deeply offended, actually. But
it
I
very
hold
much
a grudge,
felt like,
but I'm not,
it very much felt like you had this new series, and there was a format that you were moving the pieces around and playing around with the world and the characters and how they interact, and what kind of works and fits for you, and where the corners that you wanted to like poke at and check out. And I think I kind of felt in that halfway point for me as a reader was a bit of a tipping point, and it seemed like every issue after that had, I kind of want to say less thinking and more
jokes.
No, not jokes.
Because some of them, my later issues, I really like Sholly mentioned the Shaggy Man thing. That whole issue happened because I had to figure out a way to have Shaggy meet the Shaggy Man. There was there was not an idea like that issue probably took longer than most of them to write because I had to sort of backfill how you get to that. Even though it was on the cover, as it turned out, it ended up on the cover. But I kept on putting it in guest stars because it was just fun. I wanted to put in the issue with Shaggy Man, the question is in it, mainly because I wanted to have somebody attempt to unmask her.
Really enjoyed
that would be I thought that would be great. There's a thing I have planned for we can't talk about it, but the thing that might be the last issue of volume 2 there's going to be an unmasking that will be hilarious if I can make it work. But
Yeah,
because to me,
I'm
the
actually really.
unmaskings are the most fun. That's really
I don't know who you're playing on Mask, but I'm really looking forward to that issue just because I know what it's about. So that's going to be a cool issue. And by the same token, I mean, issue 12 of the first series, we needed something that would be like a big climax and go out with a bang. And so I put every member of the Batman family fighting every Batman villain ever into one issue with Scooby and the gang. And yes, I'm still apologizing to Dario for that one.
I had a problem recently, or a challenge. There are no problems. It's actually in the issue that in the most recent issue of Scooby-Doo, Where Are You, which is by me, that I had to, at the last minute, I had a sudden realization that made me go back and have to change the physical description of a couple of characters, because at one point there's a character who's a chef who has a problem, and at one point the denouement is that Daphne is going to be disguised as the chef, which turns out hilarious in the comic because the art's wonderful. The chef is a sort of shorter, plumper person who, in the magic of comics, Daphne can completely appear as just by putting a rubber mask over her face, but otherwise, and once the mask is off, she is suddenly, half a foot taller and skinnier.
That's very Scooby-Doo.
But I realized, well, the thing was, there is always an effort in a series where your main hero cast are, except for the dog, are all white, that you're always trying to add, ethnic diversity, gender diversity, body type diversity to things. So at one point the chef was black, and once I had the unmasking thing, I realized, cool, it looks like Daphne's in blackface. So I sent a note to my editor saying, I'm going to need a little more time. I mean, not that there was a bunch of stuff other than a character description or two to change, but I was like, I changed the character's, race, so I had to change the character's name. Like, there was a whole thing. But
yeah,
I think I made the right call because I just had that sudden realization of, oh, that optic's wrong. Bad.
How much thinking does actually go into that sort of a thing? Like the whole, like you said, this is a very straight suburban white group of characters, although maybe not so straight, depending on.
To me, the challenge, and it's a challenge in all the mainstream superhero stuff I've done as well. Not so much the Teen Justice book I mentioned, because those characters, even though they're parallels to mainstream DC characters, we have total freedom to make any of them any ethnicity we want. It's not really a problem as far as that's concerned. But one of the challenges, I think, is that if everybody outside of your central cast is non-white, you don't want to end up in a position where, okay, but the bad guy will still be white, because that's okay, because you don't want to make it seem like non-white people are bad guys, but you can't do, like, that's a sort of weird reverse problem.
Right.
You're creating your own problems.
Right.
So you just try the best you can. I was reminded that I was looking back to see how many Scoobies I've done, and I think if I count the Batman Scooby issues, I've done 18, which is not a lot in the compared to some people on this call. But but my first one, which had the haunting of the White House, which I had to work very carefully around the idea that the person committing the crimes was committing probably multiple felonies that would get him sent to jail forever in a lighthearted story, or he was faking the haunting. But the female character that brings the gang in, who's supposed to be a former camp counselor of Velma's, who's now assistant docent at the White House or something like that, I did manage to sneak in that her last name is Hemmings and she's black. So the implication to me is that she's a descendant of Thomas Jefferson. But that's just the White House.
It's a deep cut.
No one asks, no one told.
Yeah. A lot of the time, just try to make sure that the characters are drawn in ways that they don't all look, white middle class, whatever. But I do sometimes do stories where I specifically do things. So, I've done stories. I did a story with Rotten Eye Joe, who breaks up confirmations, bar mitzvahs, and quinceañeras. I did the Scooby-Doo Hanukkah story, where the ghost of the Emperor Antiochus steals all of the candles and oil from the Hanukkah party, and and
Wow.
stuff like that. So yeah, that's a personal favorite actually. But
How did
the
that never come up when we talked about my Green Lantern animated book that was set in Hanukkah world and House Ring had to last for 8 days? This is a
yeah, well,
man. We're
my
treading
Batman
similar
Brave and
fields.
Bold, yeah, but my Batman Brave and Bold issue with Ragman is my most heavy duty Hanukkah story actually. But anyway, so sometimes you use that stuff just because A, you wanna get more diversity in there, and B, you got to find a way to make these stories different from each other, and that of course is always, when you have a character who's been around for 50 years, that's always a challenge, no matter who the character is. And the rules of Scooby-Doo stories are so, sort of strict and time honed that it's all the more so there, which is actually why my personal favorite Scooby-Doo story, regular Scooby-Doo story, not a team up story that I ever wrote. It's a story about Scooby and the gang come to this town where they find Lance Pureheart Monster Hunter, who has been hired by the town to keep the monsters at bay that are threatening the town because as Lance tells him, well, you gotta be careful because that hideous hunchback is on the loose and whatever. And so Scooby and the gang start investigating, and they discover that yes, there is a hunchback in town, but his name is Myron, and he's actually a nice guy with a birth defect. And Lance has convinced him that he should only go out at night because that way people won't make fun of him. So Scooby and the gang decide that they are going to right this wrong and expose Lance for the fraud that he is by dressing up as monsters. And so you wind up, and then Myron appears as a superhero to drive the monsters away, thereby becoming the town's new hero and having lots of friends and so on and so forth. And it's all very heartwarming, etc. But the reason I like the story so much it has all of the elements of a Scooby-Doo story. There's somebody who's a con man. There's people dressing up as monsters. There's Shaggy and Scooby getting scared. All of the basic elements of a Scooby-Doo story are in there, but they're all turned on their head, And so it's Scooby and the gang who dress up as the monsters, and it's the hero who's the villain, and it's the monster really isn't a monster, and so on and so forth. And that's probably the best departure that I've ever managed to do that's, while still feeling exactly like a Scooby-Doo story, but on a less extreme level. That's really what you're trying to do every time you write a Scooby-Doo story. You're trying to find something different that you can do with the characters, but that will still feel like Scooby-Doo.
Is there any kind of editorial direction as far as a kind of tone or approach to the books, or is it ultimately just hiring the people that are going to do a good job and letting you guys just kind of run with it?
Hey, editor, I've been lucky. I think the run of editors in recent years has been very good. The kids' books at DC are not generally a plum assignment. They're usually a thing that you at the junior staff do with supervision so that they earn their chops. And I try to remind some of the people that have worked with me before rising to greater things that they should remember that it was my fine work that really impelled them to greatness. And strangely, it doesn't work.
I was going to say, how's that working out for you, Ivan?
Not great. I'm very friendly with some people who don't give me any work, but that's okay. I don't. Again, much like the grudge I'm holding against our host, I keep it very down deep. But there is a licensor. There is somebody who represents Hanna-Barbera's interests who checks the stuff out, and I think the editors probably, though the editors definitely pay attention, I think they trust the Hanna-Barbera representatives to sort of weigh in if they think something doesn't make sense. Same way they have people on the Looney Tunes books that Sholly and I have both written for who will say, "Oh, no, 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 no. You cannot do that." So I haven't gotten a note back on a Scooby thing in quite some time, other than maybe once. I think there was a note that it wasn't specific enough about like different body types or something like that. Like it was a very sort of it was sort of a not trusting that we knew what we were doing. It was somebody new, I think, or somebody filling in for someone, but it's been fine. They trust, like you said, they trust us to some extent, and these characters are pretty. Despite all the different iterations, these characters are pretty clearly these characters. There's not a lot you can do. You can't have Daphne's not going to be scared of a mouse, and Velma's not going to, miss something obvious because she's dumb. Like, there's nothing you can. And Shaggy is not going to suddenly have a deep grasp of physics or ancient philosophy. Although, back to my White House issue again, just because I looked at it more thoroughly today, I remain very pleased with myself that Shaggy is the only one who recognizes the ghost of President Taft, because of course Taft was a big fat guy who liked to eat. So they're sort of like, who? And Shaggy's like, that's William Taft. He was America's most eating president. And the ghost of Taft is angry that that's what he's remembered for. And that pleased me to no end.
See, I did a story once where Shaggy, secretly without the bad guys realizing, calls for help by citing the act, scene, and line number of a Shakespeare quote.
No.
And then later, when it's revealed that that's what he's done, one of the others says, wow, I didn't know you knew so much about Shakespeare. And he says, well, I don't, but I know 73 different ways to secretly call for help.
Very good.
It's interesting to hear about the Hanna-Barbera involvement, just because I've talked to a lot of people who've worked on the DC Hanna-Barbera books, like the Flintstones and Snagglepuss and Jetsons and whatnot. And during that kind of 3-year period with Scooby Apocalypse and Future Quest, everybody said that Hanna-Barbera basically was like, go to town, with the exception of, I think, they told Mark Russell to just try and squeeze in a Yabba Dabba Do every issue or something like that. So it's interesting to hear kind of a little bit more involvement with the all ages Scooby, although maybe that's ultimately why there is a little bit more, or maybe
I think those books, which, boy, did I like Flintstones. I know Snagglepuss gets a lot of the big huzzas, and I like that book fine, but boy, Flintstones I thought was next level. I think everything Mark Russell does, I'm glad, I am envious of and totally respect that book propelled him as it did, because boy, it's good. But I think, sort of understandably, maybe it's just Sholly may have a different take on this, but I think it's probably a very sort of polarized thing of, if you're doing classic form Scooby-Doo or which any of these characters, they're going to make sure that every rule is followed. The books you guys are doing are on brand. Right. If you're going to do experimental stuff, they're going to worry less about it, because that's not their business. They're not in the business of teenage and up books with these characters in them. The same way, I don't think Warner Brothers ever, like, I would never write a Looney Tunes comic with Roadrunner in it where Roadrunner talks, even though there were some Roadrunner cartoons where the bird talks, which I find totally unacceptable.
Were there? I mean, I know there were comics.
I believe there were later not good TV shows that had it, and they don't work. But certainly there have been comics that did, and I like to think that if there was somebody sort of manning the till a little bit more rigorously, there'd be a note back that Coyote doesn't talk, Roadrunner doesn't talk. No. I've cheated in those stories and had other people talk, but I feel like
I've had them hold up signs, Yeah.
The people?
No. But no, so I think Ivan's right. Because we're doing the traditional versions, they have to be the traditional versions, right? When I was doing Scooby Team Up, and every third or fourth issue would be a Hanna-Barbera team up, every time I did one of those issues, I would watch so many cartoons with those characters to make sure that I had the speech patterns right, that I was doing the right kind of story for them, that I was, I was getting all the history right, that I was doing all, to the degree that they had history. Some had more than others. If I was doing Perils of Penelope Pitstop, or I was doing Hong Kong Phooey, or I was doing Dynamite, or whatever, I was going through DVD collections right and left. Fortunately, I have a well-stocked library that I could draw on. But I think that is a large part of why Ivan and I do a lot of this stuff, is because the editors know that the licensors know that we know the characters, and that we're not going to do anything too crazy, And it makes everybody's life easier because, if the stuff gets approved without notes or with minimal notes, then it's easier for the licensor, it's easier for the editor, it's easier for everybody. So I think there is a certain amount of being careful about who you put on this stuff so that you know what you're going to get.
As far as the genesis of Batman Scooby-Doo, I'm kind of curious, the end of Scooby-Doo team up and then a little bit of a gap and then Batman Scooby-Doo happening. Was there a plan there? Did team up end for other reasons, sales or DC shakeups, and where did the Batman Scooby-Doo mysteries come from? Was it because there's also like the book series, was that like synergy, or which one came first? If just kind of like if you can fill in the blanks as to how that happened.
Maybe Ivan can. That stuff's always a mystery to me. I could not understand for the life of me why Scooby-Doo Team Up was canceled, and then within the space of a few months, there was Scooby-Doo and Guess Who, and there was no accompanying comic book. I have no idea.
I have theories with no real basis, just from a little bit of the time I spent more inside the Warner Brothers family. I think there was always a sense that you never knew what was going to work. And having been, and Sholly knows this, having been the lead writer on the Beware the Batman comic book series based on that cartoon, where I wrote the first issue and maybe one or two others before it was canceled after 6. So I wrote the first issue of the shortest run ongoing Batman series, I believe, in history. Like the differing lead times and such, I think they have not rebranded the regular Scooby-Doo comic in a bunch of years, probably because they don't want to tie it to something that doesn't work necessarily, would be my guess, to the extent that they think about it. If the people who are doing the comics even are aware that there have been different shows and different iterations. They also haven't attached it to when there have been ones where the characters have very different looking eyes, or different art style in general. They haven't changed that house style, I think, on any of the tie-in stuff. I don't think the chapter books have had a different look to them either. But no, my sense was not that there was a great synergy, although the way DC and the way Warner Brothers was having somewhat inconsistent success with adapting DC characters to other things, Batman sort of became the most important brand, even more than it had been in the years previous, where Batman was the most important brand, but there were a couple of others right behind it. I think in more recent years, there's Batman, and then way down, much farther down the sheet, are all the other characters. So that's why DC was publishing more Batman comics in a month than they had in many, many years. I think there were more chapter books and such. And then the Batman and Scooby things, I assume, I have the same no strong sense of it that probably you two do, that there was Scooby is a more flexible brand to tie to something like Batman than, say, the Looney Tunes characters are. You couldn't do a monthly Batman and Bugs Bunny comic would be a fascinating train wreck that Sholly and I would fight over the chance to write, and then watch as it collapsed under its own weight with remarkable speed. But the idea of doing Batman and Scooby-Doo, I think they wanted, my guess would be, I'll tell you the part that's a guess and I'll tell you the part that I know. The part that's a guess is they were doing a bunch more Batman books. There was probably a sense that there ought to be something that someone who isn't a teenager could read that had Batman in it coming from DC. And there was no ready to be on the air Batman cartoon to adapt in any form. Mm-hmm. And there's also that that production chain of, if we have a modern comic that kids can read that has Batman in it, we can put collections out of it in stores and they can buy it there, which has a longer lifespan than the periodicals do. And we're years past there being one of those on TV. We're years away from there being another one on TV. So what can we do that feels a little different? And Batman, Scooby Team Up had been fantastic. So I think they wanted some of that DNA, and that made a pretty obvious pairing. The part that I do know for sure, and Sholly might remember this, when the project was beginning in its earliest forms, it was going to be one of DC's digital first books, where you would get 10 pages every week I believe was the plan, or maybe 10 pages every 2 weeks. But I think it might have
No,
been
it was 10 pages every week. It was going to be two
right.
issues a month,
But I think
which
that
is
was
why
part
they
of the
needed
reason
both of us to write it.
because they figured that writing 2 issues a month would be a lot.
Too
And
taxing for either of us.
They're not wrong. But so as a result, that also may be a factor when we talk about the difference between the first half and the back. Like I remember specifically thinking about those early issues in where would the cliffhanger be on page 10?
Right.
Like what's the thing that's going to happen? And once you don't have to do that, the story form can be a little different. And it can be a little more loose and flexible because you don't have to worry about an act break at page 10.
Right.
But I think that's what happened. So the one place where corporate stuff happened is with the AT&T merger, and then the Discover. Like at some point, the digital comics went away.
Yeah,
and that sort of shorted things out a little bit.
I sort of suspected with the merger, when AT&T came in and they had all the firing and a bunch of the sort of B-level titles got canceled and a whole bunch of Batman series started showing up, like twice as many Batman series started showing up, and I assumed that was probably why Batman and Scooby-Doo kind of got connected. And also, like you were saying, Ivan, that they didn't really have a book for younger people to read Batman and tie that to Scooby. And because I thought ending Team Up was very strange, because Team Up was trucking along. I mean, I assumed maybe it was a sales thing or a rebranding thing, but it was interesting and fun, and it was incorporating a lot of different IP, and you could have Batman in there whenever you wanted to. And
so here's the thing about Team Up. And I'll say I don't really know exactly why it ended. I'm assuming it was probably a combination of sales, and they figured 50 issues was enough, and it was time to go on to something else. But the interesting thing about Team Up behind the scenes is how it started, and that also speaks a little bit to the question you were asking about where this stuff comes from. So when I was first asked to do this, it was a one-shot Batman and Scooby-Doo comic book. And so Christy Quinn, the editor, had asked me to pitch ideas for this one shot. And I said, sure, great. And so as I usually do, I gave her, I don't know, maybe 4 different story ideas, something like that, very different kinds of things, because I wasn't sure exactly what they wanted and whatever. And so that they could pick whichever one they liked best. And then Christy said, you know what? When people saw all these ideas that you had, we decided we should expand this. And so it's not going to be a one-shot anymore. It's going to be a 6-issue limited series. And as one does when one is a freelancer in that position, I said, great. And now it was a 6-issue Batman and Scooby-Doo limited series. So I started working on the first issue, or maybe the first issue or 2, maybe. And then Christy said, people have been talking, and they thought we could really expand this out beyond Batman. So now this is going to be an ongoing series of Scooby-Doo Team Up. But right now we only have the rights set up to do Batman and Scooby. So for the first few issues, do Batman and Scooby. And then by the time we get through those issues, then, we'll get everything in place, and then, we'll broaden it out. And so the first 3 issues of Scooby-Doo Team Up are Batman Scooby Team Ups. But because I didn't want to do the same thing over and over, the first one is a pretty straight Batman Scooby Team Up. The second one is Ace the Bat Hound, and the third one is Bat Knight. Love Bat Knight. And then it just sort of went from there. And so I wound up, my one shot turned into 50 issues of a comic book, which, God knows I'm not complaining about. But I honestly, I don't know why it got canceled, but kids' book sales are never as good as Batman or X-Men or something like that. And that's just sort of a given. And
right, that Batman Adventures comic that we all think of as being some of the best Batman comics around, guarantee it didn't sell as well as any of them, as Batman or Detective were at that time. So
absolutely,
it's definitely because the channel it goes through is like, well, there aren't that many, only so many 10-year-olds come in my store, so I don't need that many copies.
Yeah, I remember once I was in a comic shop. I was in another city. I wasn't in my regular comic shop, and I never go around saying, "Oh yeah, I wrote that," but my wife does, and so she mentioned to the person who's working in the shop that I had written. It was Batman Brave and the Bold at that point. And the person said, "Oh yeah, you know we love that book. It always sells out." And I said, "Oh, so why don't you order more copies?" And there was this blank look.
You could order one more.
Yeah.
You could just order one more and see what happens.
And that's the perception that you go up against. But the flip side to it is, what Ivan was talking about before, which is the joy that doing these things that are out of continuity and that don't have the same level of supervision, let's say, that when you're doing action comics or detective comics or something like that, you can get away with all kinds of stuff and you can just like have fun. And that's a wonderful thing.
You mentioned your love of the Adam West Batman. There's a very Silver Age vibe to the books. Ivan, do you have a love of Silver Age books? Is that definitely something the two of you are drawing on?
Yeah, we both
absolutely.
We have talked about this in other places. We both have the same love of an old Batman hardcover reprinting comics from the 30s to the 70s. That we pretty much milked every page of that stories, that the formative stories. But sure, and I was a huge Batman Adam West fan. There were toys, there were things left over from my older siblings in my house. My dad worked for an ABC affiliate at the time, so he had glossy black and white photos of the cast that I managed to have. The last ones that my brother didn't sell to other kids, which is a whole other story. But yeah, in some ways, sometimes when I write Batman, I hear Michael Keaton's voice in my head. Sometimes not. One of my great joys, I'll just keep on plugging the first issue of Batman Scooby as my favorite comic I've ever done. Really isn't, but it's right up there. What I backed into, just pure luck, and this happens a lot with comics. I'm sure Sholly has had this experience. I'm not going to be all, goofy in the the characters tell you who they are and what they want to do, because I'm not there yet. But on the other hand, I think I had figured out what that issue was going to be, and when I got to around page 18 of the 20-page script, I realized that I was going to do an ending that had Batman narrating essentially an explanation for why the Batman in the universe of this comic is a smiling, happy Batman, and it's entirely because during Batman Year One, he met teenage crime fighters and a crime-fighting dog, and it occurred to him that would be cool. And so that Batman was inspired to have a dog and a sidekick by meeting the Scooby Gang.
Yeah.
And that to me, that creates Earth Batman Scooby as an entirely parallel world to the other ones, even though, of course, it doesn't matter. We can have... This is the Batman of Brave and the Bold in the 1970s, as far as I'm concerned, too. He smiles. He smiles when things are funny. He can team up with anybody. It doesn't matter if he's fighting. He can suddenly be fighting in World War II one issue, and be helping Adam Strange on Ren in the next issue. It's fine. The children don't care. I don't care.
Yeah, it's that insane Bob Haney vibe. I love that. But I have a vivid memory of sending Ivan a gleeful email because I think it was issue 11, but I had finished writing issue 12 a little bit before Ivan was writing issue 11. And when I got his script, I sent him an email and said, "You did Dr. Double X. I was trying to figure out how to get Dr. Double X into issue 12 and I couldn't figure out where to put him. Yeah, thank you." Dr. Double X had last appeared in, I don't know, 1963 or something like that. But
surely Grant found a way to use him somewhere. I would imagine. That great.
Grant Morrison has probably brought him in somewhere.
A doctor.
Yeah, I would imagine.
He's Dr. X until he splits in two, and then he's Dr. Double X. Sure, of course he is.
And I do think, the Silver Age vibe is something that I immediately went to when I started doing Scooby Team Up for two reasons. Three reasons. One was because it fit with the old Batman Scooby Team Ups from the new Scooby-Doo movies. Second was it's what Ivan said before. Those were the days when comics were being written for all ages. And so trying to do something that would work, that wouldn't just be for kids, it wouldn't be, gruesome and over the top and whatever. That's kind of the sweet spot. And so it's a really nice fit. And yeah, and I we've both done it. Ivan did Batman Year One. I parodied Dark Knight at one point. We have fun with whatever we want to pick and choose from, which again goes back to it's the great thing about doing the kids books. Nobody cares. We can pull anybody we want from any era. I don't think either of us have found a way to do, Zaz yet, the serial killer. But short of that,
Yeah.
Ivan, you mentioned hearing Michael Keaton's voice, and something that I was thinking while I was reading some issues today of Batman Scooby-Doo Mysteries. I hear Super Friends Batman. I hear, what was his name? Olan Sewell?
Yeah, sure.
I think that's the name. Yeah, that's so clearly. I don't know why that popped into my head. I mean, there's been so many Batmans, from Adam West to Kevin Conroy to so many Batmans, and I'm not even. I mean, Super Friends is looms kind of large in my history, but it's not something I circle back to often, and it's not something that I have a really deep kind of nostalgic love for. So to have that voice pop into my head, I think was kind of it felt like you two somehow brought that out with the kind of Batman.
Without intending to. Maybe I think, much like Sholly was saying, picking up on me referencing Brave and the Bold a certain amount, and not just the comic, but of course also the great TV show. Mm-hmm. But there's also an element of it that I sort of give Grant Morrison credit for it, even though his Batman is far from my favorite Batman, is that the idea that he tried to do Batman in a way where all the stories took place.
Yeah.
As far as he was concerned, this Batman he's the Batman who knew Chief Man of Bats, and he's also the one who saw Robin die at dawn, and he was replaced by Azrael when his back was broken. Like all of that happened to one guy, which is staggering. But so for me, it's like, if there's a chance to show some of Batman's old costumes, there's going to be an Azrael Batman costume in there, and there's going to be Pirate Batman, and there's going to be 90s Batman. If I don't think we'll ever say, oh yeah, that was when Bane broke my back, but we're right up. We'll walk right up to that line, because it's fun, and it's fun in that way also of implying that larger world, which for the older reader, it's fun to know that they're in on the same joke, and for the kids, they're still getting a whole story, and maybe they'll see that image in the background that'll make them think, oh, that's kind of cool. Let me do a Google image search on Batman as a pirate, and I'll find this cool comic. And they become bigger Batman fans, the same way Sholly and I did from an oversized hardcover book that reprinted some of the stories in black and white, and for no reason. But
yeah.
So is there any desire, you've both been kind of working in this kind of period and tone for Scooby, is there any desire to do any kind of different type of Scooby-Doo story? I don't want to say like more sophisticated, because that implies that what you're doing isn't sophisticated, but just sort of in the same way that like Mystery Incorporated differs from Scooby-Doo Where Are You, where just kind of incorporating different kind of elements, drawing from different sort of places, and moving the characters maybe darker, maybe lighter, Be Cool went funnier, stuff like that. Are you very comfortable in this sort of classic Scooby pocket, or do you have interests in playing with different types of iterations of those characters?
Well, I mean, I loved Mystery Incorporated. I thought it was hysterical. I would be very happy to write a book based on that, but nobody has asked me to.
I don't think anyone's doing one. So.
Yeah. I find that the classic Scooby stuff is flexible enough that you can do all kinds of stuff with it. Do I feel, I never had a desire to write Scooby Apocalypse. I think it was nicely done. I read a bunch of it, and I appreciate what they did, but I never felt like I wish I was writing that. I'm perfectly fine with this stuff because it hasn't stopped me from doing what I want to do. It doesn't stop me from doing Hitchcock parodies. It doesn't stop me from doing Midsummer Night's Dream. It doesn't stop me from doing, what have you. But I don't know. So I'm perfectly happy to just work within the constraints of it and find ways to sneak things in when nobody's looking. But I don't know. What about you?
feel pretty similarly. I think the challenge in keeping Scooby fresh is finding ways for the villains to not always be real estate developers, and for some of the settings to be different. I remember one of my early issues, and I really thought this was going to get us further in the world, but it did okay. I did an issue where there was a haunting of a theater that was showing the hit Broadway show Franklin, which was a musical based on Benjamin Franklin that seemed very similar to Hamilton in a way that was almost actionable. But there was a character who looked a little bit like Lin-Manuel Miranda in it. And that was fun for me just because I could put in some of the stuff about like the rush tickets and it being a big deal. Eventually, Lin-Manuel Miranda did tweet a panel from the issue, but I could never. And I think I sent a copy of the issue to his management, but never got any kind of acknowledgement of it, which bummed me out a little bit because I thought we could totally cash in as everybody did at the time. And I did an issue, the length of time it took between pitching and it coming out. There was an issue that came out last year where the premise was the gang gets involved with being guests on a TV show, which happens a lot in my issues. I admit it's a trope. That was a web series where the people build elaborate box forts, which is an actual thing that exists on the web that my 9-year-old was probably 6 when he was watching those. And he hears me talking about him in the distance, but he'll get over it. By the time the issue came out, he had not watched one of those in more than a year and a half or 2 years. And I was like, but see, it's based on stuff you used to like. No interest, not at all. But trying to make it something a little different and have it reflect a little bit more of the world, even though I don't think, I'm trying to picture if you had the Mystery Inc. gang all carrying smartphones and tablets and stuff. I don't know.
Well, I have them doing that.
but they're not running through the scene carrying them. Like
No.
They have them when they need to have them, and then they sort of disappear.
Yeah.
My big achievement in Batman Scooby, I think it was where I had Daphne driving the van. I was very excited.
That actually kind of excited me too when I saw that.
I was like, why should it? I mean, I know Fred doesn't really. We talked about Daphne. Fred doesn't really get enough to do either, but it can't always be the boy driving.
You guys kind of commented a little bit earlier about, splitting the gang up or not having everyone in every issue. Did you find it was a struggle to sort of service all the characters?
Not always. I mean, I have all the characters in every issue, but I focus on different ones. So I'll do things where, like there's one issue of Batman Scooby where the focus is really on Daphne. And it's the one you were talking about, or actually it's the one after you were talking about. It's Jenkins comes with Daphne to Gotham City so he can visit his old Butler School friend Alfred. And it's really an Alfred-Daphne team up for much of the comic. But everybody else is in there with Batman in, sort of a B story. So you just put the spotlight on different characters and different issues. The default is obviously, you're always going to go to Shaggy and Scooby because they're the funny ones. But if it's always Shaggy and Scooby, then nobody else has anything to do. So and like Ivan was saying, if it's always Velma just being smart and solving everything, then what's the point to the rest of them? So so you find ways to highlight different characters in different issues.
I sometimes find that I've forgotten to give Fred anything to do. I will admit. I was writing something earlier and I was like, oh, I guess Fred should say that because otherwise we're on page 8 and he hasn't done anything except be in the background. And
yeah,
I have nothing against Fred. I just don't, there's not as much use for him sometimes. So I did do an issue of Scooby where it was very important that he and Daphne were both incredibly good surfers. That was very important to the payoff of the story.
So with Batman Scooby-Doo Mysteries Volume 2 coming out, is there anything you can talk about that you're looking forward to, or?
Oh, sure. So
Ivan's shaking his head no, and Sholly's just
no. Well, because they've already solicited the first issue, so I can tell you what's in the first issue. The first issue, Ra's al Ghul has a plot that spans the entire globe, and so it's Batman and Scooby and the Batman of all nations. With all the international hijinks that implies.
Is Scott Gerald's going to draw that one?
Actually, I don't. I haven't seen the art yet, but I'm thinking that one's probably going to be the art. But we'll give Scott a break on that one. But I don't know. Has your number two been solicited yet, Ivan?
Yes, it has. That's Daphne as Batgirl fighting Poison Ivy, who has given all
Yeah.
of the police in Gotham City a rash
Right.
for reasons. and
And
it's a wild ride. That was one where Christy Quinn, our editor, asked me for cover ideas, and I gave her 4, and she liked all of them, and the artist liked all 4 of them and did sketches for all of them. And then the cover editor at DC liked all of them and said, "These are exactly what I like." I said to Christy, I was like, "If you want this to be a 4-issue miniseries, you got the covers already worked out." oddly, that didn't happen, but
it'll be the
yeah,
variant covers.
yeah, it's gonna be pretty good. We may be having more co-writers on volume 2 than we did on volume 1. I think there's a sense that there's kind of not a good place for new people to get in on these things. So yeah, they're giving away our territory, but we're it's going to be good. I like Sholly's first script a lot. He hasn't read mine yet because it's not finished, but these are a hoot. There's really, I find them some of the most challenging stuff to write, but it's really satisfying, and the joy that people who don't pay a lot of attention to work I do, no matter how much I self promote, when they are aware of Batman Scooby-Doo existing, is incredibly gratifying. They're like, "Oh my god, I have to see that."
And mostly the same gang of artists joining you for volume 2?
As far as I know. As far as I know. Yeah.
Is that something you guys are kept in the loop, or is that something all going through Christy?
A little of both. I mean, Christy makes the calls, but I mean, we know it's going to be one of the usual gang, but
not everyone can
occasionally,
do this. Not everyone can do this to the satisfaction of all the masters that are involved. It's
right. And occasionally I will specifically ask for somebody in particular. So like that Scooby Team Up 50 with all the different incarnations of the Scooby Gang. I knew that we needed an artist who would really keep all of the different versions on model and different from each other. And so, I said to Christy at the time, "Can you give this one to Scott?" Because like I said, he was one of the guys who designed the Pup Named Scooby-Doo characters, and he worked at Hanna-Barbera for years and years and years and years. And so I knew he could do it, and it would probably be easier for him to do it than for Dario, much as I love Dario. And, we've worked well together for many, many years. But that particular issue was a good fit to Scott. So occasionally I'll ask for somebody in particular, but mostly I'll just leave it up to Christy because she's got good judgment. And, I trust her, and it always comes out okay.
Oh,
Awesome.
Yeah, for sure. And I will say on regular Scooby, they've recently, a newer artist has joined the fold.
Mm-hmm.
Valerio's drawn some of your stuff, hasn't he? As well as
I think 1 or 2, yeah.
A guy named Valerio Chiola, whose style is really unusual for Scooby. Like it's a little looser, even though the characters are exactly who they're supposed to be. He drew the issue that's out right now, that the one that takes place in the woods, and the cooking show one. And it's really kind of fun to see a style that probably would never be on the TV show, but still feels exactly right down the line. Like, you don't ever go, "Is that supposed to be Shaggy?" Like there's never that experience, but it's very cool.
That very much suits me. Like, as much as I love the original models, because these characters are so elastic, I love seeing people bringing their own kind of flavor to it and leaving their fingerprints on the characters. And it's not impossible to make them look classic, but also look singularly yours. So I like it when artists can do that.
Yeah,
sure. So very cool. Well, let's finish her up with, if you guys want to talk about the latest stuff you've got coming out, things you want people to be looking out for.
Okay. There's one other story that I should tell because I would be remiss otherwise, and my niece would be very disappointed. So early on, after I had started writing Scooby, done maybe my first couple of stories, if that, Joan Hilty was my editor at the time. And I had this conversation with Joan because my niece Esty at that time was, I don't know, maybe 7, thereabouts. And the fact that I was writing Scooby-Doo eclipsed everything I had ever done in my life in her eyes. And I mentioned this to Joan, and Joan said, "Yeah, a lot of the people who work on Scooby-Doo say that. I don't really know why." And I said, "Well." And so a few days later, when I saw Esty and I told her about the conversation, she said, "Well, does she realize that it's Scooby-Doo?" And that is the power of Scooby-Doo. In a 7-year-old's eyes, that is the power of Scooby-Doo.
Yeah.
Oh,
friend
Sholly, you mentioned at this point it is now off mic because of
Okay.
previous shenanigans. But you had commented on the related to Ghostbusters the Return, and you
Oh, yeah.
said you
Yeah, the fascinating story. Yeah.
yes, the potential
So
Scooby-Doo or the
here's why
attempt.
it was so hard for you to find the book. All right. So, yeah, 2004. It was the 20th anniversary of Ghostbusters. There was a publishing company run by a guy named Byron Price, who Ivan might know. Byron was a book packager and a publisher, and he would get the rights to various things and he would put together books for him. And a couple of the editors who worked for him were old friends of mine, one from Marvel and one from college. And so I did stories in a couple of prose anthologies that he had about Marvel characters and whatever. I did a novel with the Gen 13 characters. And then I was asked to do the Ghostbusters thing because I guess, the fact that I had done Looney Tunes and Clive Barker's Hellraiser probably made me a good candidate. So I wrote the book. I had enormous fun writing the book. I did. One of my disappointments was I had a chapter in which, because the city of New York had fired the Ghostbusters, they needed to get new ghost hunter to take over because there were still all these threats and whatever. And so I did pastiches of everybody from Scooby-Doo to Kolchak the Night Stalker. And it all got cut out because they were afraid of getting sued, even though it was parody and whatever. But what happened with the book was, so at this time, Barnes and Noble was still controlling the bulk of the market. Amazon was not as big as it is now. And Barnes and Noble said, this is a 20-year-old property. We're not going to carry it in our stores. We'll put it on our website and people can buy it that way, but we're not going to put it in stores. And that was the kiss of death because that immediately meant that the book was going to have a small press run. And then what happened was that within a few months after the book came out, Byron was killed in a car accident. And there was no plan set up for anybody taking over the company if he was not around. So suddenly, here was this thing where Sony owned the rights to the characters. Byron's company owned the rights to the book, but nobody really had the rights to distribute the book at this point because nobody had all the rights. And so I suspect that there was probably a whole mess of copies in some warehouse somewhere that probably got destroyed in the end. I don't really know. I've got the copies they gave me, but and I continue to save them for that rainy day when I need some income. But as a result, it became this sort of, holy grail for Ghostbusters collectors because nobody could find a copy of the book anywhere. And so you go on eBay and there are copies for like, $200 or whatever it is, which I think is ridiculous. But I have seen that there is at least one or two bootleg PDFs of the book online. So if you just want to read the book, go for it. It's a fun book. It's a fun book. You can tell that I was learning how to write a novel, not as badly as during my Gen 13 novel, but you can tell it's my second novel. But it's a fun book, and I enjoyed the hell out of it. So
Fair enough.
yeah.
Now I have an answer to my pain.
Exactly. It's not your fault.
For my bad choices. There was two copies on the bookstore shelf, and I don't even remember why I didn't pick it up. I just think I assumed, oh, this is a huge IP. This is something that's gonna, there'll be a copy here next week. No worries. And they'll always reorder it, and then Oh,
Yeah.
well.
Nothing goes away forever, he said to himself.
Yeah.
As the truck with
If
the
it
cyanide
weren't for the
thing.
fact, if it weren't for the fact that the people who made those decisions at Barnes and Noble were probably long gone, even if they're still around and alive at this point, I can only imagine what they thought when, 2 more Ghostbusters movies came out.
Yeah. So new projects, anything you guys want to shill for the people or let people know is coming out?
After you.
Oh, really? Well, the timing is actually perfect. I just want to make sure I get the name exactly right. So coming out the week after Labor Day from Inside Editions, which I think is somehow partnered with Simon and Schuster, is my holiday hardcover, Batman Returns, One Dark Christmas Eve, the beloved holiday
Wow.
classic, which is it's the same artist, a guy named, let me make sure I'm right about this. His name is not on the Amazon listing where I think it should be, because I think he's not getting enough credit. J.J. Harrison, who drew the Die Hard told as a Christmas book, where it was done as Twas the Night Before Christmas, which was a huge seller for Insight a few years ago. They've decided with the anniversary of Batman Returns that even though it's set at Christmas, they're going to lean into the idea of it being a Christmas movie. And I got hired to write the adaptation of Batman Returns to the meter of God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen, which is insane. The art is amazing, though. Like the idea that I put this delicately, I was not paid well for this, but I suspect I am one of the highest paid poets currently working in America. Much less about the book and more about the poetry game, but it's ridiculously fun. The art's amazing. The artist included story things that we sort of had to cut out or work around. I got to have the Michael Keaton movie in my head a lot, even though he's not actually in it very much. A lot of people forget in Batman Returns, Batman is almost an ancillary character.
Yeah.
But it's a hoot. And I will say, Sholly, if you've never had the experience of writing to a specific meter, especially for me, who's someone who likes to listen to music while writing, and you can't listen to music while writing something in musical form unless you want to listen to God Rest You Merry Gentlemen over and over again, which I did not. The only thing I was happy as I was writing that assignment came up during COVID times, because otherwise I would have been in my usual workplace, which would be sitting in a Starbucks somewhere, and people would wonder why in not Christmas time someone was humming to Christmas carols to themselves over and over again. Wait, that comes out after Labor Day. Next issue of Multiversity Teen Justice comes out that same week, or maybe the week before, like September 1st. And my next issue of Scooby-Doo, Where Are You, comes out in November. And that is one where something happens at an award show that is very much like, but legally not, the Academy Awards, where it's possible that a disgruntled former host is haunting the place. But I didn't give away the ending of the comic. So I really wanted it to be a Billy Crystal. I really. And then, of course, Batman Scooby. Sorry, Batman Scooby. Batman Scooby in October for Sholly and November for me. But
I'm glad you knew the on sale date, because I had no idea.
Sholly's issue comes out on my birthday, which for everyone who wants to identity theft me is October 11th.
But they should obviously buy the issue to celebrate your birthday.
And charge it to you.
Sure.
And charge it to you.
What better present for me than please? Yeah, since they will have stolen my credit card numbers at that point. Go for it, guys.
So let's see. So for me, besides Batman Scooby, which I now understand is coming out in October, the most immediate next couple things. So right now, on the stands, I believe is the second issue of my Gala 4-issue miniseries that I'm doing for Dynamite of Mad Balls versus Garbage Pail Kids, if you remember either of those things from many years ago, which has actually turned out to be a lot of fun, I have to say. And to my utter shock, Mad Balls versus Garbage Pail Kids #1 was apparently Dynamite's #1 selling book for July. So we are now, I just got the email today, we are now going to be doing a second Mad Balls versus Garbage Pail Kids series. But then next week, I believe, is something that I've been looking forward to for a very, very long time, which is my graphic novel, Batman's Mystery Casebook, which is a book of solve-it-yourself mysteries with Batman, where you can match wits with the world's greatest detective. And it's a whole lot of fun. Chris Uminga drew it and did a wonderful job. It's a completely different style than I had in my head when I was doing it, but it's cool and it works beautifully. And it's a really good book. I'm really very happy with it. So those are the big things at the moment.
And when Sholly says next week, he's talking about the day that
Oh
you're
yeah.
probably listening to this episode. So be sure to run out and check that out. Guys, thanks so much for coming on the show and having this conversation. Thank you for being so generous with your time. It's been a pleasure talking with you. I've actually wanted you both on the show for a while, so it was kind of nice that everything just kind of fell into place in the last couple of weeks, and we got to do this. So, is there anywhere on social media you want to be found?
I am not found anywhere on social media because nobody cares what I had for breakfast. But you go ahead, Ivan.
Everyone cares deeply about my diet and habits, so they can find me on Twitter at Ivan M, as in Michael, Cohen, Cohen. I'm also on Instagram there, but there will never be anything there that is different from what's on Twitter. So really, just go there. Just go to Twitter.
I appreciate your Kids in the Hall reference on your Twitter with the Hecubus.
Wow. Thank you for noticing.
Evil!
You have to go to Twitter to find out what he's talking about. Go to Twitter, go to Google, go to Amazon Prime. It's an exciting journey that you can take through media corporations to figure out what we're talking about. And then back to DC.com to find out all about our upcoming comic book project. Thank you so much for this. This was super fun.
Yeah, this was fun. Thanks for having us.
And that concludes my conversation with Scooby-Doo writers Sholly Fisch and Ivan Cohen. I hope you enjoyed that chat. I certainly did, being a part of it. I want to thank Ivan and Sholly again for coming on the show. And if you haven't already picked up the Batman Scooby-Doo Mysteries Volume 1, I would encourage you to go check that out. And if you weren't planning on picking up the Batman Scooby-Doo Mysteries Volume 2, dropping in November, I would also encourage you to check that out. And also, as discussed at the end of the conversation, I'm sure Ivan and Sholly would love it if you checked out some of their other upcoming work. Ivan has the Multiversity Teen Justice series currently on comic book shelves, published by DC Comics, as well as the Batman Returns One Dark Christmas Eve, the Illustrated Holiday Classic, which I believe comes out on September 13th. So still some time to run out and plan to pick that one up. Sholly has the Madballs Garbage Pail Kids crossover, the improbably successful Madballs and Garbage Pail Kids crossover, currently coming out and being published by Dynamite Comics. Check that out if you're as curious about that as I am, as well as Batman's Mystery Casebook, which dropped on store shelves at the end of August and looks like a lot of fun. So grab those if you can, support these fine gentlemen, and watch for the Batman Scooby-Doo Mysteries Volume 2 coming out in November. I appreciate you downloading and checking out my show. If you want to continue supporting, there are a few ways you can do so. You can go to all the social medias, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and the like. Follow, share, and subscribe to all of them. By doing so, you will not only help boost the profile of the podcast, but you'll also be able to have your ear to the ground with the happenings, the goings on of the podcast. Anything new, honestly, even just like random 3 a.m. thoughts, if you're on the Twitter, you probably get those too. But it's a really good way to stay in touch with some kind of random Scooby-Doo news and stuff that's going on with the podcast. So really encourage you to go there and do that. If on any of those platforms, wherever you're listening to the podcast, you have the opportunity to rate or review the show, that also really helps with the algorithms. And I'd appreciate it if you could drop a good review, click on some stars, and just kind of help push the show into the algorithm that's going to get it into the eyes and ears of people who might be interested in catching the program. I have been noticing a handful of new listeners. The numbers have been boosting, so something's working. Someone out there is doing something on top of just producing the show on my end. So whatever collaboration we've got going on as show and listener, it's working, and I really appreciate all the support and help that you've all provided. Feel free to let me know what you think of the show on all those same social media platforms. You could reach out, send me questions, comments, guest requests, whatever it happens to be. If you just want to reach out and say, hey, hit me up on Twitter, Facebook, and the like. Oh, and on all the social medias, either search a podcast named Scooby-Doo or at Scooby-Doo Cast. If you don't already know where to find me on the interwebs, that's basically how you're going to do it. There's also the WordPress page, scoobydoocast.wordpress.com, where I post some text interviews, some comic book reviews, and additional material that's tied into, sometimes when I interview the DC Hanna-Barbera people, they provide me with sketches and script pages and stuff, and that's kind of where like the bonus content goes. And I also have the Apocalypse Variations, which are text interviews with people who have done variant covers for the Scooby Apocalypse comic book series that ran for 36 issues, published by DC Comics. If you don't know about it, check it out. It's awesome. And yeah. So, thank you guys so much again for checking this out. I couldn't have gotten away with it if it wasn't for all of you meddling kids. And I hope you'll join me for episode 50, coming in probably in less than 30 days now, because this episode is dropping just a tad past what my original release schedule for the show is. So yeah, I'll keep everybody posted on when that's dropping. Look forward to having you back and joining me again on a podcast named Scooby-Doo. Take care, and we'll see you next time.
Everybody cheer! This is how we solve the mystery. This is how we solve the mystery. So in summation, this narration's my donation to the art of mystery solving dictation. And here's what the bad guys say when they play where the law forbids.
Would have gotten away with it too if it wasn't for you meddling kids.
This is how we solve the mystery. Bye.
Do this. Hey, look, this was.
Oh, look, it's being recorded.
Perfect.